Hey everybody, welcome back to an all-new episode of 10 to Life with me, Annie Elise. I am coming to you nice and cozy in my studio. What am I wearing? I've got my Troop True Crime shirt on. You can see it, Troop True Crime. I think we might have a few of these left. We might be sold out, but we might have a few left there on the website, annieelise.com. But anyway, I am here to talk with you guys about another case, a wild one, and one that really affects me as a parent too. And I know so many of you who watch your parents as well. So I just kind of want to give you that little blanket warning. But I feel like, how do I want to start this? As a mother, and I hate to bring it back to me, but as a mother, I feel like I can confidently say that every parent's worst nightmare is something bad happening to their child. The good news is in all of that if the unthinkable does happen, if your child goes missing, there are so many tools nowadays that really exist and can help you find your child, help you recover them. You can post their picture on social media, you can send out an Amber Alert, you can ask strangers all over the world if they have seen or heard anything. You can also use the Find My Phone app to see if they're just like hanging out down the street where they're at. Or in the situation, if it gets very, very dire and very scary, like I said, you can call the police and have that Amber Alert go out so that everybody will just immediately know to go looking for your missing child. In fact, Amber Alerts can be really effective because according to the Department of Justice, they have helped bring home more than 1,000 missing children. That's pretty incredible. I mean, when you consider that Amber Alerts haven't even been around that long, I think it was back in the 1990s, they didn't even exist. And when a child went missing, you couldn't rely on social media, smartphone apps, anything like that. Back in the day, makes me feel so old, it was really like just the milk carton. So I feel like a lot of the technology we kind of do take for granted today. Had any of these tools been in place, this case may have had a very, very different outcome. So guys, let's jump right in. Today's episode is sponsored by PDS Debt. Now, I have told you guys before, it feels like getting in debt is so easy, but getting out of it is really, really difficult. It almost feels like the system is set up so that we don't get out of debt. But I'm here to tell you that you don't have to go at it alone. There is a way out. Help is available, all thanks to PDS Debt. PDS Debt has customized options available for anybody who is struggling with medical bills, credit cards, personal loans, you name it. PDS Debt strives to understand your specific scenario, and they can help provide alternative solutions to becoming debt-free. I wish I knew about this program sooner because it would have saved me a lot of stress and a lot of money back when I was younger and less financially responsible. But I'm sharing them now with you so that hopefully they can help you. Stop waiting and start saving. PDS Debt is also offering our viewers a free debt analysis. It only takes 30 seconds, and all you have to do is head to pdsdebt.com/10tolife. That's pdsdebt.com/10tolife for a free debt assessment today. I'm telling you, you guys, it has helped me tremendously, and it will help you too. Check it out. In 1996, Amber Hagerman was just 9 years old. She and her family all lived in Arlington, Texas, which is practically like smack in the middle between the bigger cities of Dallas and Fort Worth. And Arlington itself is still pretty large, and it's most well known for being the home of the AT&T Stadium where the Cowboys play. But Amber's mother, Donna, was just 19 years old when Amber was born. And even though she was just a teenager, she was more than happy to become a mom. Donna actually suffered from a very rare disease as well that sometimes paralyzed her from the waist down. And when she first got the diagnosis, the doctors told her that she would probably never be able to have her own biological kids. So this was essentially a miracle. Getting pregnant felt like it was destiny. It felt like it was a miracle to her. And as much as she was excited about becoming a mom in general, finding out that she was now having a girl, it was like the cherry on top of everything. She wanted a daughter so that they could be best friends, they could dress up together, they could talk about boys, all the things. I mean, a lot of the times women wish for a little girl like them. I personally am my boy mom through and through, but I have my little girl. She's a little bit of a wild child right now, but she just really wanted a little girl to bond with, to have that mother-daughter relationship with. And she got her little girl, which was absolutely great, but she also had a son named Ricky, and she loved both of these kids just beyond measure. In 1995, Donna and her partner Richard, who was Amber's father, decided though that their relationship just wasn't working for them anymore, and they decided to separate. And it probably didn't help that Richard was quite a bit older than Donna as well. She was 19 years old, remember, when Amber was born, and he was 36 years old. And even though they were together for quite a few years, they were never legally married. And also, when I say that they were separating, what I really mean to say is Donna was escaping from Richard, because he was apparently extremely abusive, both mentally and physically. At the end of their relationship, Donna actually packed her and Amber and another child that they had together up, and she went to go live in a shelter. She just could not be in the same house as Richard anymore. So now having two kids, leaving your partner. After this breakup, both of these kids, Amber and Ricky, lived with Donna. And even though it sounded like her relationship with Richard was dangerous and unhealthy, the breakup was still pretty rough on Donna. She had actually dropped out of school in 7th grade, so it was tough for her to find a job. And especially because she wasn't just having to support herself anymore. She had to support her 2 children as well. And Donna didn't want anything to do with Richard. She wanted this clean break from him. So she flat out refused to let him pay any child support towards her, and instead she went on welfare. This really gave her just enough to scrape by, but not much more beyond that. And even though Amber was a child of a very rocky breakup and her home life wasn't exactly the best, you would have never known it from meeting her. She was this incredibly happy little girl with dark brown hair. She had a little reddish tint in it, and she had the traditional 90s straight bangs, kind of some thick, choppy hair. She was now in the 3rd grade at Berry Elementary School, and she absolutely loved it. She was always on the A and the B honor roll, and kind of a bit of an overachiever, if I'm going to keep it real. She was always bringing home various different kinds of academic awards, and just really a good little girl.
I had to get A honor roll, A B honor roll, and I had to do good things in the class and help.
So you make good grades?
Mm-hmm.
Amber worked hard, and she was dedicated, and part of that was because her mom, Donna, didn't want her to make the same mistakes that she had when she had dropped out so young in the 7th grade. She was always nudging Amber to take school seriously, make it her first priority. And I mean, she really was trying to just kind of break that generational cycle. Naturally, Amber's bond with her mom was unlike any other. I mean, she was sweet and caring to just about everybody, but she and Donna were basically inseparable. And even though Donna did what she could to shield both of the kids from the struggle that they were facing, the reality of what that was, Amber did start to pick up on a little bit of it. She still caught on. She was only 9 years old at the time, but we know that kids can be like sponges, soaking in everything that's happening around them. I mean, they can pick up the littlest things that you would never even expect. Now, obviously, a 9-year-old cannot fix any sort of financial problems, but Amber still tried to cheer her mom up however else she could. She loved drawing, so she made picture after picture for Donna. They were all handmade with love, signed by Amber to Mom. And if she wasn't making drawings for Donna, she was writing her sweet little handwritten letters in this like 9-year-old little scratchy writing, just like something that would fill your heart as a parent.
Look, Mom, I made this for you.
Thank you. That's pretty. Dear Mom, this is for you that I made at school. I love you a lot.
Besides drawing, Amber loved playing with Barbies. She loved riding bikes. And like most big sisters, Amber also dragged her little brother Ricky around everywhere. Like he was just like an extra Barbie doll in tow with her to play with. I mean, inseparable. Even though there was a 4-year age gap, I mean, they were very close, and they spent almost all of their time outside of school together. Amber even called Ricky Bubba as a nickname, and Ricky called Amber Sissy. So on Saturday, January 13th in 1996, Amber was now 9 years old, and she and Ricky were both off of school with it being a weekend. And the day was uncharacteristically warm for the middle of January, but because of this, Amber and Ricky really wanted to take advantage of the nice weather and go play outside. Literally just a few weeks earlier, too, on Christmas, Amber had gotten a brand new bike. It was pink, it was her favorite color, she had been asking for it for a while, but as we know, bikes aren't cheap, and it wasn't like Donna had all the extra money in the world to be spending on things, but for her it was very important to give Amber a special Christmas. So now Amber had this beautiful pink bike that she had been asking for, and the weather was nice. So the very first thing that came to Amber's mind was she and Ricky should definitely go ride around, go take this bike out in the neighborhood. Now on this particular day, Amber and Ricky were staying at their grandma's house. So when they asked their grandma if they could go out for a bike ride, of course, she said sure, she had no problem with that, go have fun. The only condition of this was that they only went around the block. I mean, she didn't want them riding off too far away. So Amber and Ricky agreed to that rule, and off they went. They left their grandma's property at exactly 3:10 p.m., but by 3:18, just 8 short minutes later, everything had changed. Because that's when 5-year-old Ricky came back to their grandma's house, but he was all alone, and Amber wasn't with him. Now, their grandmother obviously wanted to know where Amber had gone, and Ricky told her that when they were out riding bikes, Amber had told him to ride a little bit ahead of her, so he did. He had been off on his own in his own little world just riding, and he wasn't really paying attention to where Amber was until they were almost then back to the grandma's house. By that point, when he did sort of, look over his shoulder to see if he could see where she was, he couldn't see any sign of her. And I'm sure he probably was feeling a little bit excited at first, like if they were racing. It was probably not a big deal that he was going so much faster than his sister. He kind of left her behind, like, I'm gonna win. Except then he waited for a little while for Amber to catch up. But she never did. Now, Amber wasn't a rule breaker or a troublemaker, especially with Ricky being around. So her grandmother thought that it would be pretty weird for her to just ride off anywhere, and especially after she had told her not to leave the block. But then after a little more back and forth with Ricky, he admitted that they had broken that rule. They didn't just stay in the block, but they didn't think that it was that big of a deal. There is a Winn-Dixie grocery store not too far from the grandmother's house, and when Amber and Ricky apparently drove by it, they were close enough to see the parking lot, and they saw that the parking lot was pretty much empty. It was just this huge empty stretch of concrete where they could just ride around all they wanted on their bikes, doing donuts, turns, all of the things, and they really were excited to do that. And even though it was technically not on the grandmother's block, it was still super, super close. So they figured that it wasn't that big of a deal to just go a little bit further, just a little bit more than they were supposed to. I mean, what could it hurt? But now Ricky was back home, and Amber wasn't. Now, as a reminder, this was the 90s, so the grandma couldn't just call Amber on her cell phone to ask where she was. All she could do was worry and then debate whether or not it was serious enough for her to call the police. And in the meantime, a call was going into the police station, but not from the grandmother, but actually from someone who happened to be the one and only witness who had any idea of what actually happened to Amber. This was a 78-year-old man named Jim Cavell, and he was a retired man living in the neighborhood where Amber and Ricky were riding their bikes around. Like the two of them, he wanted to enjoy the warm weather that day. So even though he usually would just be reading the newspaper inside that time of day, he decided to step out. He wanted to get some fresh air. And it's my understanding that Jim didn't personally know Amber, but he did notice this little girl riding up and down the sidewalk by his house, which was right across from that Winn-Dixie parking lot. But then he saw a black pickup truck pull up next to this little girl on this pink bike. The man in the truck grabbed the little girl right off of her bike and then threw her into the driver's seat of the truck. It all happened really, really fast, like a couple of seconds. And it was way too quick for Jim to do anything or try to stop what was happening.
I had seen that little girl over there playing up and down there.
Arlington 911, what are you reporting?
Yeah, I saw a black pickup, and he grabbed the little girl and he took off toward town with her. And she hollered.
He also said that he knew it wasn't just a parent grabbing their kid to take them home because this little girl, she was thrashing, she was kicking, she was screaming. But obviously, she was too small to really fight back against this grown man. And Jim didn't think that the little girl would be fighting so much if this was somebody that she knew. So he knew something was wrong here. So right away, Jim knew he had to call the police. He told them everything that he could in as much detail as he could, but his statement was still pretty vague. After all, like I said, he was almost 80 years old. His eyesight was not great. The abduction happened across the street from his house, which was far enough away that he couldn't really make out a whole lot. It all happened very quick as well. So when the officers asked Jim to describe the kidnapper, all he could say was that it looked like it was a man who was either white or Hispanic. He might have been in his 20s or maybe even his 30s. He did look like he was under 6 feet tall. He had dark-colored hair that was either brown or black. But again, pretty vague, and basically, really, it could have just been about anybody. Now, weirdly, Jim seemed to do a much better job of describing the truck than the man. Maybe he was one of those people who's just really into cars. I don't know. But this is a direct quote from Jim's statement to the police. The man was driving a full-size, fleet-side, single-cab black pickup with a short wheelbase. Okay. To be honest, I'm not even sure what half of that means. But hey, it's a decent amount of information for the police to be working off of, so we will take it. Jim also said that the truck was fairly new, that it might have been a model from the 1980s or even the 90s, but it was in pretty good condition. There was no rust, no dents, nothing like that, nothing that stood out. He said that after the man grabbed Amber off the street, he took off driving toward the center of the city of Arlington and not toward the nearest highway. Now think about what would happen if this exact scenario happened today. Our phones would obviously start pinging with Amber alerts. It would take maybe an hour max before all pieces of the relevant information and photos would start being shared all over social media. The missing child's parents would be doing interviews with the news. They'd be trying to get the hashtag trending. If you lived in a bigger city, you might even see billboards above these major highways telling everybody to watch out for that specific vehicle or this missing child with this description. There'd be millions of people essentially keeping their eyes open to see if they could spot the missing child. Sadly for Amber, though, none of that was even a thing yet. There was no such thing as an Amber Alert, but I'm sure now you can probably figure out why this case is so important and where the Amber Alert got its name from.
Search in the immediate area does go on, although police say the reality is if this alleged kidnapper was in that pickup truck, he could have driven off and be long gone by now.
So the good news was that Amber had been reported missing right away. Great. It's not like all these hours went by with nobody checking up on her. So the hope was that the police would be able to find her safe and well, right away. They got the call so fast. They had a description of the kidnapper, a description of the truck. Everything was going as well as it could. I mean, for such a terrible situation. Now, obviously, the kidnapping, it wasn't a good thing, but if a kid is going to get kidnapped, you want it to happen in this kind of context, where the adults all notice, they all have loads of information ready to go, the police are contacted, and you're not skipping a beat. Except, there wasn't a whole lot that the police could do with that one tip. The dispatcher could tell all of the squad cars to watch out for that truck, sure, but beyond that, there were no smartphone notifications to send, no social media, no hashtags. Outside of the police officers themselves, nobody knew to watch for Amber. I mean, sure, you could get flyers made, but that takes time, right? It takes time to get them made, mock them up, put them out there. Precious moments, precious hours that you're losing. By the time they could get any information on, say, even the evening news where lots of people would see it, the truck could have driven out of the state or even parked somewhere hidden. The police could only search so many streets at one time, and that would be pointless once the truck was off the roads. So there was no real way to tell people what they needed to know, or tell the people who needed to know, who needed to be on the lookout for this little girl. In fact, the police hadn't even told Amber's family about the abduction yet. Remember, Jim, the neighbor, didn't know Amber. He didn't know who her grandmother or her parents were, so he couldn't tell them what he had seen. And the police hadn't even identified Amber yet either. All they knew from Jim's report was that a little girl had been taken. So from the grandmother's perspective, all the information that she had to go off at this point was what she had heard from little Ricky, that they were driving their bikes around, then he didn't see what happened to Amber, but she was gone. The grandmother was still probably thinking that it was possible that Amber was just fine, just riding off somewhere else, had left the beaten path of the block, and she'd be back any time. So she sent her husband, whose name was Jimmy, not to be confused with the neighbor Jim, the guy who called 911. She sent Jimmy to go to that empty parking lot just to see what was going on and if Amber was still there. Now, by the time that Jimmy showed up, Jim, the neighbor, was getting off the phone with 911. And Jimmy saw Amber's pink bike. It was just laying there on the ground across the street from Jim's house. So he went over and he asked Jim if he had seen a little girl near there. And of course, Jim had to give him the hard news about what exactly he had just seen, that this little girl that he was looking for was thrown into the back of a truck. So then Jimmy called Amber's mom, Donna. And at first, she was in total denial about everything. Amber and Ricky had ridden their bikes around the block more times than she could even count. She didn't think of it as this dangerous thing for them to do. She couldn't even imagine that somebody might hurt her daughter while she was doing something so normal, so innocent, so typical of a childhood and childhood activity, right? Things like this just didn't happen in their neighborhood, and they especially didn't happen to her family. So she refused to believe that it was even real until she went to that spot where Amber had last been seen, and she saw that her pink bike was still there, just lying on the ground. So that's when she had no choice but to accept the truth. It wasn't some sick prank. It wasn't some misunderstanding. This was real life now.
Of course, my dad had his serious face on. I knew he was not messing with me. I knew he was telling me the truth. I just went crazy then. I just started going towards where my father said she was abducted at, screaming her name. Thought maybe for sure she would answer me. But there was never no answer. There was nothing.
And the police investigation was basically already hitting a wall. DNA technology wasn't like it is today. It was kind of like a no-go. There were no Ring doorbell cameras, no nearby businesses with surveillance footage they could pull, no busyness of smartphones or videos capturing things that might catch something in the corner of your eye. It was almost as if Amber had just fallen off her bike into like this alternate dimension. Just nobody knew where she could be. When word finally got out that Amber was missing, the community really did come together though. I mean, neighbors, friends, strangers alike, they all came together to hang up missing persons posters on the street posts, to get themselves involved in search parties. The media also got involved. And don't let my whole tangent about not having some kind of a media alert make you think that the press just stayed out of it, because they definitely didn't. As a matter of fact, this was on the news all day, and it's all anybody could talk about for days. I mean, when Donna first learned that Amber had been kidnapped, really kidnapped, she sat outside of her house too, just waiting for her to come back home. But she couldn't do that for very long because all of these reporters, all of these photographers just started swarming her house. They were setting up cameras, they were yelling interview questions from the front sidewalk. Everybody was involved trying to find Amber. It's just, unfortunately, the truth of this situation is just there was, so limited resources to work with. So Donna and Richard allowed some of these reporters to come inside their home and do these interviews, hoping that getting Amber's name and face out there would make a difference in the case. But instead, the whole thing just kind of became this chaotic mess. It got very, very complicated. I do think that all of the reporters and the TV crews and all of the dozens of other people involved in making news shows were trying to be sensitive. They weren't trying to make things worse, but from the videos that I've seen, it looks like there were just a ton of people running around. And that would give me anxiety on a good day, let alone if my child had just been taken. It just seemed pretty chaotic. Amber's teary-eyed family was plastered all over the news, with her parents begging for whoever had Amber to just not hurt her, just let her come back home. And it's so heartbreaking seeing clips of Donna and the rest of Amber's family just actively mourning their daughter almost, just asking for help, asking for answers.
I beg you, don't hurt my little girl.
But even with all of that, 4 days went by without a single update in Amber's case. And 4 days might not sound like a lot, but to her family, I mean, every passing hour was probably being in hell or purgatory or whatever your definition it would be. And finally, on the 4th day of wondering where their sweet, innocent daughter was, wondering if she was alive, okay, experiencing the unimaginable, Donna and Richard were told that the body of a little girl had been found. On that morning, which was January 17th, 1996, a man was walking his dog near an apartment complex called Forest Hill Apartments. This is in North Arlington, and it was not too far from a creek. When the man got close to the water, though, he noticed that there was something in it that looked like a body. He immediately called 911, and he reported what he had seen.
We interrupt this program to bring you the following News 8 special report.
We have late developments into the Channel 8 newsroom, and it is a rather ominous development in the case of 9-year-old Amber Hagerman.
Apparently he was walking our dog, and he had looked over the fence and had saw something white, looked again and noticed that it was a body.
The police responded to the scene, and they found a little girl's body lying face down in the creek. And when they flipped her body over, one of the officers actually caught her head in his hands. He saw that there were slash marks across her neck, which looked like they were either from some kind of knife or even a screwdriver. Now, of course, everyone with law enforcement assumed the worst. They hadn't even identified the body yet, and they didn't know for sure if it was Amber, but they still sent an officer to Donna's house to tell her that it was a possibility that Amber might be dead. And I think that they were trying to be nice by keeping Donna and the others in the loop, but this move was also pretty cruel in a way, in my opinion, because basically nobody knew anything for sure yet. So Amber's family just had to receive this information and then freak out and wonder if she really had been murdered, while still hoping that maybe she was okay and this was a mistake and it was somebody else. Not that that's better news, but at least you still have hope then. So all they could do was just sit and wait for the official yes or no. Was this Amber or was it not? And I get, again, the police trying to be sensitive and keep them in the loop, keep them informed, but I don't know, pulling myself out of the situation, maybe I would want to know because I would want to follow every beat of the investigation. But also, at that moment, I don't know if I would want my mind to wander there unless I knew for sure. Because it's almost then you get that wave of anxiety, that wave of grief. And what if it wasn't Amber? I don't know. How would you feel about that? Would you want to know every step along the way? Or would you only want to know if they had in fact identified her? Let me know as we continue in the comments because I'm kind of torn on that. So they just sat together, watching the news and crying, hoping that this body that they had just found was somebody else's little girl, no matter how selfish or awful it sounded.
I immediately knew something was wrong. And they started getting the yellow tape out, put it around my mom's home. I just went crazy then. I said, no, you're not going to tell me something that I don't want to hear. He said, we don't know if it's Amber or not. We don't know. And we just, sat around, we waited, we listened to the news. We just kept hoping and praying that it wasn't Amber.
And then after what probably felt like years of waiting, the gut-wrenching news that nobody wanted to hear finally came. The body was in fact Amber's. Even before an autopsy was performed to get an official cause of death, it was pretty clear that Amber had gone through the absolute worst, an unspeakable hell. When she was found, her body was completely naked except for one single sock on her left foot, and we know that that's never a good sign. We know what that probably means and what that indicates. And Donna shared a story with the media that I just want to add because I think it's relevant to drive home the terrible condition that Amber's body was in when it was found. Donna said that the first thing that she thought when she learned that Amber was kidnapped was that she was never going to be able to hold her baby girl again. Well, after learning that the body was in fact Amber's, that thought came back to her, and she told the detectives that she wanted to see Amber before the autopsy was done, just to be able to touch and hold her baby one more time. But thankfully, the authorities would not let her, and I say thankfully because they knew that it was something that Donna would never come back from. They told her that Amber didn't even look like Amber anymore, and that no mother should ever have to see their child in that condition. That is how bad the condition of her body was.
And I wanted to see her before the autopsy, before they even touched her. They didn't want me to see her the way she was because she was damaged so much. Her body was cut so much and she just didn't look like Amber.
The official autopsy revealed that her cause of death had been from those cuts to her throat. And this is really vile and really awful. But the autopsy also revealed that Amber had been kept alive for 2 days after she was kidnapped. I don't know exactly what the kidnapper did to her during those 2 days, and the authorities refused to say if Amber had been hurt in a sexual way or not. I think it's a safe assumption to make, unfortunately. First, because if she wasn't attacked in that way, you'd think that they would just tell you that it hadn't happened. But also remember, she was found naked, and unfortunately, in a lot of abduction cases, we see that. So that said, I'm just speculating, and this is me just reading between the lines, so I could definitely be wrong. I hope that I am wrong, but I'm inclined to think something disgusting happened. Now, regardless of what happened to Amber during those final 2 days, I have to imagine that she was terrified all day, every single day that she was still alive. And that breaks my heart. This 9-year-old innocent little girl, this stranger, her being alive for 2 days, wondering if she's ever going to make it home, wondering if she's ever going to see her mom again. I can't even begin to think about what was going through her mind over the course of those 48 hours. It is a true nightmare to think about, and it gives me a physical pit in my stomach just thinking about it right now. Now, I do want to say there is one other detail from the autopsy that's worth mentioning, just really briefly, and I'll get more into it in a little bit. But the medical examiner also found something on Amber's body that they described as fibers. So now the police knew that this body was Amber's and that she had definitely been murdered, and they made this very sad, very devastating announcement to the public. And it stunned the entire community, quite honestly, because Arlington isn't a super small town or anything, but I think it was just the fact that so many people at this point had heard Amber's story. And if they had kids of their own, it was pretty easy to picture something terrible happening to their own family. I mean, who hasn't let their kid just ride their bike around the block? It could have happened to anyone. And this was also the 90s, which it's crazy to think that that was a safer time than even today. It's like even today, you can't really let your kids out. And that's not to fearmonger. It's just like there is so much evil in the world. Not to mention people who are trying to abduct children, not only for their own sick fetishes and needs, but to sell them. It is just, I'm going to go off on a tangent and I'm trying not to. It's just really devastating that we live in such a terrible world. I feel like innocent childhood has just been stripped away from people. I remember being able to play outside until the street lights went on and go neighbor to neighbor's house and you'd kind of all play, and you can't, slumber parties, sleepovers, you can't do any of that anymore. Sorry, let me take a beat. Okay. And so the investigation is going. I didn't mean to go off on a tangent, guys. But since the police still didn't know who had done this to Amber, they hadn't made any arrests. And that meant that there was still a child abducting murderer out there. Whose child could be next? Who was the next target? Who was this crazed maniac? Who was this man? The whole community was reeling and scared and devastated and looking for answers. So Amber's funeral was held on January 20th, 1996, and the entire church, as I'm sure you can imagine, was just overflowing with people showing their love and support for Amber's family. Some people were distant family members, neighbors, family friends, classmates of Amber's, and some people were just complete and total strangers, just there to show their support. Donna was finally able to touch Amber's skin, hold her hands, and kiss her face, and obviously nothing can ever make it feel good or right to have to bury your own daughter, especially when she's so young and died so violently. But I'm sure being able to touch her and hold her like she wanted probably gave her a little bit of peace, even if it was the tiniest little bit.
I wanted to hold her, but, I got to hold her little hands and told her, it's okay. Mommy's here now. It's okay.
Amber's death had been very hard on everyone in their family, but out of everyone, 5-year-old little Ricky, he was the most confused by it. He was so little and he was so used to Amber being around him every second of every day, and he just could not understand why his sister was never coming home.
I picked him up one day from school and he goes, Mama, is Amber home sleeping, Of course I had to remind him that she's in heaven, and he goes, oh, I forgot, Mama.
Not long after Amber's death, Ricky began acting out, and eventually Donna had to take him to get some counseling. She didn't know what else to do, and she was also grieving herself. Nobody teaches you or prepares you for these kinds of things and how to deal with them, how to deal with the aftermath.
He's hitting on me, and he's not minding, and that's just not my son.
And those are normal grief reactions. Ricky is really acting out. He's showing the world how upset he is. He's showing the world, I want to know who murdered my sister.
He says, this is my fault because the bad man took Amber. And I asked him, well, why do you think that? And he says, well, I left Sissy alone. I left her by herself, and it's my fault.
My heart just honestly breaks for Donna so badly because her entire life seemed to be filled with nothing but sadness, despair. I mean, whether it was having kids young, being in an abusive relationship, struggling on her own once she got out of that relationship, losing her daughter in the most tragic and horrific way, and then even after all of that, she still continued to constantly just get the short end of the stick. It's horrible.
A lot of times I just want to go commit suicide. I want to be with her. But I have my son, and I look at his precious little face, and I couldn't do that to him.
To make matters even worse, during all of this chaos and heartbreak, just 1 month before Donna was supposed to finish school and hopefully get a good job to support herself and Ricky, they lost the welfare assistance that they had been using to help make ends meet. See, Amber and her family were in the limelight, which was good for Amber's case, but not so good when government officials are just waiting for an excuse to kick you off of any sort of assistance. And they pretty much told Donna that she had the option of either accepting child support from her ex, Richard, or figure it out on her own. They didn't care about the fact that he had been violent or unsafe, and the thinking was Donna had other ways of getting money, so she needed to use them rather than collect welfare. Not only that, but they also told her that they knew about some of the monetary donations that had been made in Amber's name. And Donna tried to explain that she had donated that money to their church, which I'm pretty inclined to believe myself, but they weren't having it. They weren't hearing it. All they heard was that she was refusing child support and that people had just donated tons of money to her, and they didn't care about the why. They didn't care about the circumstances. And this poor woman just could not catch a break. I genuinely don't know how she stayed so strong and still continued to get up out of bed every single day. It's like the whole world would feel like it's stacked against you in those moments, right? Like, the only word that comes to mind is hopeless. Is that it, right? Like, that's how I would feel. It ended up taking Donna 2 weeks after Amber's disappearance just to go back to her apartment after staying at her parents' house. For those 2 weeks, the thought of being away from the last place that Amber had been alive and happy, it was too difficult to even consider. And don't get me wrong, she knew that Amber wasn't coming back, but it still felt almost like a betrayal. And grief is a very odd and a very sad thing. Donna's parents, who were Amber's grandparents, were grieving just as hard, and they went through a lot of stages of guilt for letting Amber ride her bike around the neighborhood that day. And I think, honestly, they kind of all just needed to lean on each other.
I think I cursed God, which I shouldn't have. And I was mad. And I said, why did you let this happen to our baby?
In the meantime, Amber's classmates, teachers, friends, they all came forward and they told Donna all of these stories about Amber. Hearing these stories actually gave her a little bit of peace too, and it's kind of interesting, and you can definitely tell that this was the late 90s because something like this would never be allowed now. But not long after Amber's death, Donna actually went to Amber's school and she talked to the kids about her abduction and about her murder, answering even their most difficult questions.
What time did she leave on her bike?
At 3:10 Saturday afternoon, and she was abducted at 3:18. Just took 8 minutes. It only takes seconds. So you guys stay close to home, okay?
Did they leave Amber's bike there?
Amber's grandfather went and picked her bikes up.
Fingerprints?
Any fingerprints? No. The bad man took Amber right off her bicycle. He didn't touch Amber's bicycle. He just grabbed Amber. There were no fingerprints of any kind.
I liked her a lot.
Thank you.
She's really pretty.
Thank you.
I always wanted to play with her. Thank you. She was nice.
It really is heartbreaking with these kids telling her how much they loved her daughter, how much they loved Amber, and seeing everybody just so compassionate, choked up. It's such a loss. It is such a loss. And Amber's death sort of turned into this, like, a call for action of sorts, a call to action for people. It was like once everybody started to imagine Amber as their own child, they now had to realize just how truly terrifying it would be to be in Donna's shoes. Yes, because it would be their kid, but also because they saw that in situations like Amber's, the community was really unable to do anything helpful. It's like I said before, even with the description of the kidnapper and the truck, the police couldn't actually get the word out to anyone. So there were all of these city council meetings after Amber's death, trying to figure out how can we learn from this. Donna and Richard gave teary-eyed statements, and so did other mothers who begged for some kind of change to be made. And then city officials even heard from Amber's young 9-year-old classmates and other kids her age. They all had to grow up a little bit faster after learning the terrible reality of what happened to their young friend.
I'm terrified to let my children outside.
You know, we're all outraged now, but what are we going to do to protect our children?
We're frightened. We're really scared.
This is tearing me apart because it's hard.
So everyone was on the same page now. They were all asking for a change. The only problem was they weren't sure exactly what that change needed to be. They didn't have all the solutions or the answers to life's problems, but they knew something needed to change. So that's when a woman named Deanna Simone came into the picture. Deanna, just like everyone else, was very upset by Amber's death. She hadn't even known her or her family personally, but she was a fellow Texan, and she was a mother who had been following Amber's disappearance and murder very closely. So she wasn't going to just silently mourn and then move on. And just 14 days after Amber's kidnapping, she wrote to a local radio station with an idea that somehow nobody had ever thought of before. Deanna said that an emergency system needed to be set up to prevent situations like Amber's from ever happening again. It was already a standard practice to send out alerts for things like tornadoes or flash floods. So basically, if you were watching TV during a weather emergency, your show would just immediately stop playing, so you would get a warning about whatever was going on. Well, so she wanted to know, okay, well, this is in place. This is a system that works. We hear about the weather. Why couldn't this also be something for child kidnappings?
You have got to let go of this. There is nothing you can do about it. That was the advice I received from well-meaning friends and colleagues as I began to discuss an idea that I had in response to a local tragedy, the abduction and murder of a child. They couldn't see how, or just didn't believe that one person, one ordinary woman, could really make any difference in this world. Well, they were mistaken. Now, granted, I don't have a college degree or a very impressive title or resume, but what I do have is a compassionate heart, a deep sense of connection to all humanity, a very special love for children, and a stubborn streak that simply refuses to accept the unacceptable. And as it turned out, that was enough.
And her idea was that anytime somebody called 911 to report a missing child, the radio and the TV stations would get a notice. Then they would immediately interrupt whatever programming was going on and they would broadcast this alert. The alert would include a description of the child that was missing and then any other helpful information. So in Amber's case, that might mean something like the description of the man, his truck, things like that. It could then immediately be broadcast and sent out to thousands of people, very, very fast. She wrote in this letter that she wanted to call this system Amber's Plan. But as I'm sure you've already figured out, today we call it an Amber Alert. And it seems so common sense, right? Now looking back, because it's something that we're all just used to. But I'm sure that whenever they first read this proposal, this letter, they probably thought that it was something too complicated, something that could just never be done. Thankfully, though, it wasn't brushed to the side, and everybody agreed that some sort of system could be extremely beneficial. It could mean life or death for children in the future.
Hello, I'm John Walsh. The Amber Plan is a unique partnership between law enforcement and broadcasters to issue urgent alerts in serious child abduction cases. Statistics show that the first few hours are critical for a child's safe recovery. The Amber Plan is a partnership that could make a big difference in saving children's lives in your area. It all started in 1996, after the kidnapping and brutal murder of 9-year-old Amber Hagerman of Arlington, Texas.
It took some time to mess around and perfect the system, but the official Amber Plan got put into a test in 1998, 2 years after Amber's kidnapping and murder. It was pretty much immediately a success as well, because you see, a 2-month-old baby was kidnapped by a babysitter who her family knew and trusted, and literally within 30 minutes of the alert going live, somebody called 911. They reported that they saw the exact same car that they had described in the Amber Alert, and this meant that the police were able to find the kidnapper, and they were able to rescue that baby.
911, what is your emergency?
That Amber Alert, the lady's right in front of me. ES3949 splash pickup with a wood bed on it. I'm on Interstate 20, fixing to cross 1382, going westbound. The baby sitting in front of her, and that's her. I can't believe it.
You can literally hear in the call, even the guy who's calling in is shocked that he was actually helping solve this crime that was still in progress. I mean, the system, it gives me the chills, the system worked beautifully, and the baby was found alive and safe and returned to her family. Now, I know we kind of jumped from when Amber went missing in 1996 to when the alerts were made official in 1998, but now I'm going to get into the actual investigation of Amber's kidnapping and murder, because it wasn't going very well. Not at all. It's not like the investigators weren't doing everything that they could to find Amber's killer, because, I mean, they definitely were, but there was just this huge lack of evidence. The only real pieces of evidence, if you can even call it that, were Amber's bike and then those fibers that were found on her body that I described briefly in the autopsy. And I keep using the term fibers because I don't know anything else about them. Nobody who was involved in the investigation ever explained to the press what they were or why they were significant. The police department in general was very tight-lipped about it, and they never specified if maybe it was a piece of hair from her kidnapper, maybe fibers from whatever clothing the murderer was wearing that day. I mean, really just nothing. The fibers were sent to the biology unit in Arlington, but remember, this was 1996, so DNA testing was not good at the time. And like I mentioned before, it was basically non-existent in this case because it gave the police absolutely nothing in return. It yielded no results. So without any other witnesses and little to no evidence, they really had nothing to work with. They came up with some theories, but that was literally it, just theories. One of those theories was that Amber didn't know her kidnapper, that this was just some random creep who saw her outside, saw that she was unattended, riding her bike, and then just decided to take advantage of the situation. And this came from the fact that Jim, the neighbor, the one and only witness, said that he saw Amber kicking and screaming when this man took her. If it had been, say, a family member or a friend, she probably would have just gotten in the truck willingly. Now, the second theory, which made just as much sense as the first one, was that the man was a local, that he knew his way around the town. And this was based on the fact that the neighbor Jim told the police he saw that truck go back toward town and not toward the highway. If the kidnapper wasn't familiar with the area, You would think that he would want to get the hell out of there as fast as he could, as soon as he grabbed Amber, right? But if he was heading back toward town, that meant that he knew the area, or even that he probably had a place there where he felt like he could safely pull over, get off the road. Maybe he lived there, maybe he could park his car in a garage there. We don't know. The other reason people believed that the man was a local was because the area where Amber's body was found wasn't exactly super well known. It wasn't a tourist attraction or the sort of place where somebody from out of town was likely to just end up on their own. And in fact, it was pretty secluded altogether. It wasn't near a well-known trail or anything where tons of people were walking past it. It was pretty isolated. And the location was also only 4 miles away from where Amber was taken. That's pretty terrifying too when you really think about it, because the police were going through the area with a fine-toothed comb. There were all these people from the community putting up missing poster signs, missing persons flyers, doing searches. So it seems very risky to just dump a body in a place where so many people are walking around, crawling around, trying to find what they can. And in my mind, the only reason that the killer would come to this particular place would be because he lived nearby. He felt confident. He felt comfortable that he could just get in, get out without getting caught. And it really just turned out to be lucky that the guy walking his dog in those apartments lived right next to that creek. He just happened to be walking close by to even make out Amber's body. Other than these two theories, though, the police pretty much had nothing else to offer as far as leads went. But that didn't stop other people who weren't formally associated with law enforcement to start coming up with their own ideas. The first one isn't necessarily a theory, just more like a really scary thought to consider. It was even something that Amber's grandmother brought up the first few days after Amber's disappearance. But we know that in a lot of cases, it can be common for the murderer to get involved by joining search parties, by going to press conferences, inserting themselves in the investigation, and so on. And one theory was that that was the case here, that the killer might have sort of inserted himself into Amber's family or to those search parties after he took Amber away from them. That first day that Amber was reported as missing, when reporters and the local news anchors were literally tracking all through their house, Amber's grandmother made a comment to the reporters that the killer could be in the house with them, for all they knew. That there were so many people, shuffling around that maybe he was there. And not only that, but if the murderer was an Arlington native, there's a very high chance that they showed up at places like Amber's funeral, the candlelight vigils, the town meetings, the meetings that were held after her body was found. It's a really creepy thought. And again, this isn't really a theory, it's just a thought, because it doesn't say anything about who the actual killer was or how to locate them, but it does seem at least like a possibility, right? Now, another theory is that her dad, Richard, was involved in this kidnapping, because if you remember, Richard was reportedly abusive to Donna, so he was no angel by any stretch, and he wouldn't be the first man to kill a child to punish the mother for leaving, if he did really do it. Now, in his defense, Richard was very involved with the searches and everything else after the disappearance. But, like I said before, that doesn't mean he's automatically innocent either. There's also the fact that Amber probably would have just hopped in the truck with her dad willingly, no need for all the kicking and screaming to escape, but this is something that people have put out there as a possibility. Another theory kind of stems from something that the police mentioned, but more than likely, I think it probably just got taken out of context, but apparently there was a laundromat that's close to the parking lot where Amber was taken. During a press conference years and years and years later, actually decades later, in 2021, the police said that there was a pretty large population of undocumented immigrants in the Arlington area. Possibly some of them worked at that laundromat. So the police asked that community, specifically, that if any of them saw anything that day, they should come forward with some information. Now, in my opinion, the reason the police were talking to those undocumented immigrants is because the relationship between law enforcement and that community probably wasn't great. A lot of people are afraid that if they go to the police for any reason, they'll get arrested, they'll get deported, and understandably, they don't want to put their own lives and stability on the line by sharing any tips. So at that same press conference, the police said that they wouldn't do anything bad to the people who shared any tips, and they promised not to deport anyone. I don't know how believable that statement was, but it's what they said.
Is it possible that there were other witnesses who saw what happened, but were fearful about coming forward? With it being a Saturday afternoon that was nice, and the laundromat being right next door to the abduction, we were concerned that there could be people that were there at the laundromat who may have been undocumented and living in this country illegally. And we spent a lot of time putting out flyers and talking to the community to assure them that if there is a witness or witnesses who have that concern, We are not interested at all in pursuing any kind of deportation or any interest in their undocumented status. We would just ask that anybody with information come forward.
Well, as you can imagine, now in the day of technology and social media, Reddit took that comment and went wild with it. Wild. Their new theory was that Amber's killer was an undocumented immigrant who worked at that local laundromat. Now, obviously, there's not much to this theory. It's just people pointing fingers, kind of going by stereotypes, but it also didn't help that the eyewitness account said that the kidnapper was either white or Hispanic. I didn't see anything specific that makes it look like the police ever interviewed the workers at the laundromat, so I can't say with 100% certainty whether or not they were actually investigating anybody else. But this theory to me, honestly, my opinion, it seems like a whole lot of nothing. I think it's a big nothing burger. But that's also true of all the other theories. None of them went anywhere. For many years, there was nothing but silence in Amber's case. The authorities always promised that it was still an active and open investigation, but like I mentioned earlier, that pretty much just meant that they were sitting around waiting on somebody to come forward with something that they saw or heard all these years later. And as the years went on, the one and only eyewitness passed away. Then, 11 years after Amber's murder, her father Richard passed away. Then, her grandparents passed away. And they all died without ever knowing what happened to Amber. And that, to me, is a sort of pain and torture that I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy. Even to this day, it's just been a little under 30 years since Amber's kidnapping, and nobody has ever been named a suspect or a real person of interest. And as a parent, I can't help but wonder how Donna feels about all of this. Sometimes when you see a story like this that goes unsolved for decades, there's someone that you can kind of blame for the investigation not going well. The police might have mishandled something, or maybe they didn't take the case seriously. But as far as Amber goes, everybody did do their best. It just sadly wasn't good enough. There is still some hope that someone either saw something that day or maybe knew somebody whose truck fit that exact description. Maybe still to this day, there is somebody who knows something and can come forward with that information. Maybe somebody has made a deathbed confession or a drunk confession, something. In the first few months after Amber's disappearance, Donna hoped that the murderer would do just that. She even wrote a letter that was published in the newspapers, and in my opinion, it was worded in a way to make whoever was responsible for this, whoever killed Amber, almost feel guilty enough to turn themselves in. And I want to give you a warning, this is definitely a rough one, especially if you have children. But Donna's letter read, "To Amber's killer or killers, you can't hide forever. You will not get away with this. You stole my little girl from me, my best friend. You did a very horrible act, and I hope to hell you are satisfied. My little girl did nothing to you. Why did you terrify her? Why did you take her clothing from her? Why did you touch her where you're not supposed to? Why did you hurt her? And most of all, why did you kill her? I'm going to tell you a little bit about my daughter. Amber was a 9-year-old Girl Scout. Amber made A's and B's in the 3rd grade. She had perfect attendance and citizenship awards. Amber was a very loved child. She was smart, kind-hearted, and helpful too. I've told you enough about my little girl. Now let's hear about you. Do you have a family? Does your family know what you did to my little girl? What made you decide to take my little girl? Where did you take her when you decided to take Amber's life, and when did you put her lifeless body in the creek? Let me ask you one more thing. How could you look into my little girl's tearful eyes and do what you did? Remember, there is one person who saw you do this horrible act, and that one person is God." Signed, Amber Hagerman's mommy, Donna Whitson. That entire letter just crushes my heart from the inside out. And unfortunately, though not surprisingly, nobody came forward. And as sick as it is, I wouldn't be surprised, actually, if her killer kind of got some sort of thrill from that letter if they ever read it, if they ever saw it, which would truly be the exact opposite of what Donna was intending to do, what she was hoping for. The sad reality is, it doesn't matter how the killer feels. We need somebody to come forward. If anybody knows anything, they have to share it. And that's probably why it has always been so important to Donna and also to the authorities to keep Amber's name and face out there. Today, Donna and Amber's not-so-little brother Ricky are still constantly in the news, fighting for justice for Amber. In 2021, on the 25th anniversary of her kidnapping, a press conference was held to give updates in her case. And again, to just beg the community to come forward with any information. The police also announced that in the last 25 years of working on Amber's case, over 7,000 tips came in. I don't know if that was necessarily a good or a bad thing to share that number, but to me, it seems like it might discourage people from calling in, because what could they possibly know that 7,000 other people haven't already shared? But Donna also spoke, and it was just as heartbreaking as the clips of her on the day that this abduction happened. The only difference now is that you can see that the years have only added to her sadness and her grief. And I can only imagine that it would never be something that got easier over time, no matter how much time ever passed.
I miss her every day, and she's just so full of life, and I want to know why. Why her? She was only a little girl. And to Amber's killer, I'm asking you today to please turn yourself in. Give Amber justice. Amber needs justice, deeply, deeply needs justice. And to anyone who has seen or heard anything about Amber's case, please come forward. Thank you. The Amber Alert, I'm very, very proud of it, because it is help saving our children's lives. It's helped bringing our children back to mommy and daddy. And so it's another legacy from my daughter, that she didn't die in vain, that she is still taking care of our little children as she did when she was here. And I'm very, very proud of my daughter and for all she has done for our children here.
To this day, Amber's case is still unsolved. The authorities hope that even after all of these years, they will be able to one day catch Amber's killer and bring her family closure, peace, justice, the justice they haven't been able to have.
We believe this case will get solved. We believe that there's no way the killer in this case could have committed the crime in the manner that they did without someone seeing, hearing, or having some knowledge of what happened. We believe someone out there still has information that can help us solve this case, and we want to make sure, as great as Amber's legacy is with the Amber Alert, and that's something that everyone involved is very proud of, we want to make it clear that we are still working and trying to solve this case as well and bring justice for Amber.
And Donna has never stopped fighting for Amber and for other children like her. Today, she's the vice president of Amber Child Safety Systems, and she has also helped to create the National Offender Registry.
The PROTECT Act of 2003 will greatly assist law enforcement in tracking criminals who would harm our children.
So I hope that one day, by some sort of miracle, there will be some sort of major update in this case that leads to it being solved. No matter how out there that might seem, I mean, we know it's never impossible. The Golden State Killer was caught after 4 whole decades of those murders being unsolved.
Police today released a new suspect description, a man in his 20s or 30s. As of 1996, under 6 feet tall, medium build with brown or maybe even black hair. The truck, black 1980s or 1990s, full-size, fleet-side, single-cab pickup truck with no sliding window, no chrome, no stripping. The truck was in good condition with no visible damage, according to the notes.
So if there is any chance that even just one single one of you listeners or viewers possibly was in the Arlington area, heard something, saw something from January 13th of 1996, or maybe knew somebody who owned a truck like that was described, or sees it in old photo albums, please, please contact the hotline for Amber's case. You can contact them at 817-575-8823. Thank you so much for listening to Amber's story today. It is just as important to hear as the day that it happened, and please share this everywhere you can, and hopefully her family gets some answers. All right, thank you guys again for tuning in, and until the next one, stay safe.